Hello and welcome to today's presentation between Argano and Microsoft on Discover Business Process-Based Implementations. Thank you all for joining. First off, a few housekeeping items. If you have any technical or content-related questions during the presentation, please feel free to use the Q&A window and we'll address your questions. We might wait until the end for the majority of those, but that's not to say we'll do our best to answer and make sure we address any of your questions as time permits. Closed captioning is available by selecting the CC button in the bottom right corner of your media player screen. You can expand, minimize, and move each of your window panes displayed on your screen if needed. And this presentation today is being recorded, and we'll send all registrants a link to the recording after today's webinar. Once again, and welcome today's presenters. My name is Drew Lensack. I'm a director of delivery here at Argano in the Argano for Microsoft Tower. I've been in the dynamic space for about 15 years in various roles as an end user, a dynamics consultant, and now in the consulting management space. And today with me, I have Microsoft's Anne Krupke. Anne, would you like to take a minute and introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Anne Krupke. I'm a senior fast track solution architect at Microsoft. My background is in supply chain management, and I've been doing a lot of work in the business process oriented implementation space recently. So I'm excited to be here today to share what we're doing.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Anne. Our agenda today, we're going to go into the background and the benefits of business process-based implementations. Why do Anne and I feel the need to talk about this today? What is the importance of business process implementations? What is it? Why you should consider it in your organization, whether it's with an ERP or a CRM implementation. Anne will take us through and introduce us to the Dynamics D365 Guidance Hub, a new documentation set that the Microsoft Fast Track team has provided for both partners and users alike to take advantage of that really help us through this approach in business process-based implementations. And then we'll both address scenarios and our experience in business process-oriented implementations. What can you consider when you want to walk through this approach? What are the challenges of it? What, once again, are the benefits of it? And how can your organization use this approach to tackle a D365 implementation, whether you're coming from a legacy Dynamics product or even a brand new ERP system, or maybe even a hybrid approach. And of course, we'll leave plenty of time at the end for a Q&A. So first off, what are the benefits of a process-based implementation? Why should we talk about this approach? What are the differences between this and other methods? A lot of time as customers and even as partners, you're siloed into addressing a solution with a specific technology. Maybe your company inherited a legacy ERP system and you're forced to use that, and it might not match your business needs. It might not match your industry needs. So using a business process-based implementation has several advantages. First off, a better solution fit. You're not designing this with the system in mind, you're designing with the process in mind. What is your customers and your organization's end goals? They want something that addresses their requirements as an organization, no matter what that technology is, rather than forcing processes to follow a specific flow based on the systems they're using. So keeping that design in the context of the process rather than fitting a technology is often a better solution fit. It helps your organization understand the impact of their decisions, of their activities, of implementing a solution. If I'm in sales, I need to know how my activities impact finance when they go to invoice and order. So thinking of a business process, not my individual piece of an activity, helps us address that throughout the organization and keep the end-to-end solution in mind. It helps us document current and future state processes and establish those benchmarks and determine the impact of any design decisions and allow and empower our users to make those. And then with that, it increases user adoption. Because they're involved from the start and they're thinking of their processes, not just the system they're going to be using, there's a sense of ownership from the business as they take these on, from your subject matter experts and your business process owners. They're involved in configuration and design, the input of their business scenarios and their activities that they need to perform are driving the solution that we have in mind with business process-based implementations. So all of this really drives to a different way of designing the system with the business more in mind, rather than just the technology or tools that they have to use. And with that, and a way to look at that, I'm going to pass it over to Ann now to address business process documentation with Microsoft Dynamics 365.
Thanks, Drew. I'm really excited to talk about what we're doing here today. So in March of this year, we launched the new Dynamics 365 Guidance Hub, which is a collection of some of the existing resources that we have for Dynamics 365 guidance, as well as a platform for us to launch our new business process documentation. So you can access this now at aka.ms/oneguidance. And let's talk through kind of what some of these things are, and then we'll talk about why we're doing this. So it's your one-stop shop for anything Dynamics 365 implementations or adoption. And a really big part of this is the new business process catalog, which was an effort that the Fast Track team organized over the past several months of talking about everything from end-to-end processes all the way down to specific business processes. And we ended up with over 1,800 different processes you might use Dynamics products to support. This then translates into our process-centric guidance to help you deploy Dynamics 365 solutions faster. And we'll talk about how this process-centric guidance is different from product-centric guidance in just a second. But in addition to those things, we are also including things like cross-product reference architectures. So a lot of people we know both use Dynamics 365 finance and supply chain, as well as customer engagement. So being able to take the different products in the Dynamics stack and give you guys the best practices, architecture, and other downloadable templates to support using more of our products together is another thing that we have added. And for anybody who doesn't know, we at Fast Track have long published the Dynamics 365 implementation guide, which was an 800-page document geared at providing best practices for kind of the more technical aspects of your Dynamics implementations, as well as more of a governance and methodology recommendation. And that used to just be in this big PDF that you kind of would search through when you were looking for something. But as part of our new Guidance Hub, the implementation guide has been converted into the standard docs articles format and is now available in that format on the Dynamics Guidance Hub.
So, Ann, this is really cool to me because you say 1,800 or more processes, cross-product reference. So it's not just, I deal often in supply chain management and manufacturing like yourself. So it's finance, it's supply chain management, it's customer engagement. It's the whole D365 suite, really, that's supported, correct?
Yeah, exactly. So the idea behind this was that we think it's faster and more successful to implement business applications when you start by saying, this is what I do. Now looking at the entire suite of products that are available to me, or low code, no code solutions, how do I support my process? And of course, there is a part of software implementation that typically does require business process change, but we also want to make sure that it's easy for our users to build solutions that support what they need to do, which is the whole idea behind this. So yeah, to me, it's a completely different way of looking at the resources we provide to our users and our partners. So I think it's really exciting. And the other one of the other things that we're doing through the Guidance Hub is the implementation portal. And if you haven't heard about that yet, I could spend another hour just talking about how awesome that is. But basically, the Fast Track program is a customer success program run by Microsoft to help our customers implement Dynamics products. And the way that you engage with Fast Track typically depends on kind of your licensing spend and other qualifying parameters. But what we're trying to do is make everybody a fast track customer who can access all the resources that we have. So the implementation portal is a free self-service portal where you can put details in about your project information, and then get custom recommendations of fast track resources, whether it's tech talks, docs, articles, blogs, the implementation guide, or even self-service workshops that you can run. So this is now a tool that's generally available. And if you want to learn more about that, you can go to aka.ms/FTIP. So that's another really cool one. We're not going to talk about it much more in this session, but it is a super powerful tool if you're currently implementing Dynamics. And I know, Drew, you're going to roll that out to all of your customers now, right?
Absolutely. More to come, but great to hear that that's now generally available and has started. I think that'll help all customers and partners alike.
Awesome. Yeah, so all in all, the Guidance Hub is meant to be a one-stop shop for implementing Dynamics, and the goals out of it are to accelerate your implementation by giving you easy to find and search resources, and to make implementations more successful by increasing user adoption, which is kind of in line with what you were saying earlier about business process implementations. I guess my animations didn't work, so we're just gonna click through, go through. Can you see the whole slide? It's okay. So the there we go. Okay. So what is the difference product versus process documentation, and why are we making this distinction? Why now? So when you look at product documentation, that's what we are all traditionally familiar with in terms of Dynamics documentation. I pick my product, and then I go to a module within that product, and I look up what a parameter, a field, or a form is for. And that's really useful information, but you're already putting yourself kind of in a silo with that product and module selection. Also, product documentation very often uses technical language, and as many of you will know, one of the more difficult things about implementing Dynamics in a business is that the technical product terms, like the name for a field, everything's a journal. And what does that mean to the business? The business probably uses another term for it. So sometimes it can be harder for people to understand product documentation when it doesn't align to the business language that they use. It's also very focused in on the particular product that it's documenting, and it doesn't have that crossover into here's what other products could be used to support the scenario. It's all just, this is a product and how it works, which again is very valuable information and something that's really important for implementations, but it's just not serving that other purpose. And while some of our documentation has included best practices, for example, maybe performance considerations of choosing a certain parameter field, it doesn't by nature include best practices. And these are all reasons that we're looking at process documentation to kind of complement what we have in terms of product documentation. So for process documentation, we've got the end-to-end processes. So you orient yourself based on what process are we doing, and then what step in the process are we trying to configure. And then we look at the scenarios for that step that most closely align with your organization and your requirements, and then provide you with those best practices on how to implement it. It uses business language first. So we're putting terminology guides out there. We're making sure we reference all the different terms we see for the same concept so that you can connect what's going on in your organization very quickly into what we do in Dynamics products. And speaking of Dynamics products, plural, the concept of process-oriented documentation means we can be wide open. We can say, actually, you can do customer creation in Dynamics sales. You can do it in Dynamics finance or finance and supply chain management. Or in some cases, it might be a third-party ISV solution, or it might be a low-code, no-code solution. And long-term, when we build this all out, one of the things I think is really exciting is we're planning on doing kind of open-source tools for people to use, whether it's code samples or Power Platform solutions or things like that. And because it's published by Microsoft and because it's part of what our goal is here, the process documentation is going to make sure to include best practices. So you've gotten, you know, you need to configure this scenario. Here's 5 ways to do it. And these 5 ways are all kind of Microsoft validated and approved. Because I know that's a very big question mark. And maybe Drew, you can speak to this. But when it comes to implementations, because Microsoft partners are the ones who often implement, you also still want that check mark from Microsoft that you're using our product in the way it was intended to be used, in a way that will support your business.
100%. I think there's various ways we can look at that. One, as partners, we obviously need to maintain our certain level of status, and we want to be certified in how we should use these products and the best practices Microsoft addresses. But just looking at this delineation you point out, I think is really relevant for our audience. So in my mind, historically, when I started in AX3.0 and AX4.0, at the very best, I might find some product, no process at all, documentation. There's always the point and click. Go here, click this, create new, name something. There's always the how to, but not the why. And I think that's the important point here. We're getting at the why we do something, not necessarily the tool we should use to get there, and really addressing that end to end. And we get into cross platform solutions and cross industry solutions, like you mentioned. But aligning with Microsoft is always good for us as a partner, because we know we're headed in the right direction. At least we don't always have to be 100% in line, but being 95% in line is a good benchmark, maybe.
Yeah, and you'll see this in a minute. We're going to talk about the roadmap for this documentation. We are not planning to do this alone. In fact, when you think about the amount of work it's going to take to build out this full repository of process-oriented documentation, we're absolutely going to be checking with our partners, relying on our partners to help provide that, the learnings that you have, right? Because when you're out and configuring with your customers, you're getting that information real time, right? And we see some of our customers, but we don't see everyone. So it's really a circle of users, partners, ISVs, and Microsoft together, who are going to ultimately have all the knowledge to provide the best practices based on what we've seen, because we all have a different angle and a different experience. And of course, as I said, I know, just click it 6 times and the animations will work. Process documentation is going to ultimately point back to product documentation. So we're not replacing product documentation. We're not ditching it. We're supplementing it and then pointing back towards it where it makes sense. But we're making it easier for anybody to find what they are looking for, right? Leading to faster deployments and higher user adoption.
It's a valid point, and I think there's still room for both. Now there's tools to help maybe make the creation of those more efficient, which isn't the point of today's, but with things like generative AI and tools like that, we'll be able to hopefully replicate or produce some of this in better efficiencies with our organization.
Yeah, I definitely think that there's an angle there. I've heard that there are some people I know in the industry have kind of deployed a generative AI model on the existing product documentation so that they could do kind of queries on it. And I think that there was some degree of success there, but I think we'll be even more successful if we can have this additional angle and lens to look at things through. Because if a business user, again, doesn't know the terminology to use, then the product documentation isn't necessarily going to be as helpful. So I think that there's definitely, this is maybe foundational to get the full robust AI experience as well. So I'll give kind of a quick overview as well on what's included in the business process guidance that we're building. We're calling it 4 levels of documentation, and I'll kind of illustrate that with examples. So far, we have identified 14 end-to-end processes. So these are things like your order to cash, record to report, plan to produce. If you want to see the full list, of course, you can access the the website to see the full list. Within order to cash, there would be business process areas. Across all processes, there are 114 business process areas currently. So for order to cash, that's things like monitor customer credit and collections, create and manage sales, or trade across companies. And then within a business process area, there is a business process. So this is where we talk about there's 1,800 plus specific business processes that we identified across the 114 areas and 14 end-to-end. So for monitor customer credit and collections, some of our processes would be detect fraudulent orders, block or close customer accounts, and process and write off bad debts. And then the final level, and this is where I think it gets the most exciting, is the patterns. So we have what we call patterns or anti-patterns, which would be a negative pattern, right? So a pattern is a best practice. It's a scenario coupled with here's what you make, or here's how you configure it. And then an anti-pattern would be a absolutely don't do it this way, and this is why. And patterns is, it's kind of hard to estimate how many we'll end up with eventually, because every process you have could have dozens of patterns, right? But initially, I think we're somewhere in the 2,000 to 3,000 range. So for detecting fraudulent orders, we could have a pattern that is creating fraud rules for automatic order holds in Dynamics 365 Finance, or manually putting orders on fraud hold, or using another product, like we said, it's multi-product, using the actual Dynamics 365 fraud protection tool. And how do you do that? And how do you do that in alignment with Dynamics 365 Finance? The list of business processes and all of the other areas is available at aka.ms/business process catalog. So another thing that we're looking for collaboration and feedback on, if you've got ideas, feel free to add them there, or to use any of the channels of communication that we have open to provide whatever feedback you've got on that.
I think that's a good call to action, maybe for the audience.
Yeah.
People, I think, often worry they're not heard, but from what I've seen, and with the growth of the Fast Track team, that feedback does get considered. People need to obviously be cognizant of the fact that a large tier 1 ERP system, it might take a while for changes to happen, but the feedback from the customers and the large organizations using it, the use cases for things like this really drive both user adoption and your team helping out with solutions like this. I don't think that really existed before the Fast Track team.
I don't know if I can take credit for that, or the team can take credit
Fast
for
Track
that.
Team.
I don't know if we can take credit for that, but I will say I definitely agree in terms of if there's something about this framework that doesn't make sense to you, if there's a way we can do it better, absolutely, we want to hear. We were actually just writing another article this morning, and we decided that we needed to rename a bunch of our business processes, because when you look at it in a flow diagram, it looks super repetitive. So it is a work in progress. It's going to be something that we need to keep editing and refining, because we want it to work for you. So absolutely, we're open for the feedback and suggestions. So definitely. In terms of what's in a pattern, we talked about, Drew and I kind of talked about how do we give you guys the idea of what this documentation is without necessarily, reading line by line through a docs article. So we're just going to talk through the concept of a pattern and then give you an example. And then we'll talk about the roadmap for this documentation. So a pattern, like I said, is a scenario and then a best practice or a worst practice. Is that the opposite of a best practice? Worst practice?
Non-practice? I don't know.
A non-practice? We're calling them anti-patterns. So the right way is a pattern, the wrong way is an anti-pattern. So we'll give you the context and the problem. So what is the business scenario within a particular process that you need to solve? And then we'll give you more qualifying information. So when do you use this pattern versus another pattern? And then we give you the solution. So that's the practice, the best practice to follow. And even beyond that, we'll go through additional issues and considerations. So we might say, well, if you're using this, then this pattern won't work for you because of this conflict, which, never happens with Microsoft technologies ever. Or you might want to think about it this way if you have this additional flavor to the scenario. And then beyond that, we'll even point at procedures. So if it's a pattern where you need to set up multiple things, we'll list the different things you need to configure and in that particular order that you need to configure them. So when we talk about this patterns documentation, reducing time to deployment, we're not making you kind of go figure out the steps of configure this, then configure this, then configure this. We're telling you that. And in the context of the requirement or scenario that you're trying to design for. And then additional resources, whereas it comes into pointing towards standard product documentation, tech talks, blog articles, or any other information that might help you make decisions or fully implement the solution. And to make it easier to search, we've added a number of tags, such as the products that the scenario applies to, industries that the scenario applies to, stakeholders such as business analyst, accounts receivable clerk, or inventory manager. So who are the people who are going to care about this pattern, so that ultimately this giant document repository will be a lot easier, again, for you to search and find information.
So, and there's a question in the chat about not necessarily seeing the flow of what we're showing here in the slide represented in the website for business process catalogs. I know this piece is a work in progress, and we don't have patterns for all of the processes mentioned, but we do have some that are showing, and we're going to talk about an example here in the chat. But I believe you will provide the link for where these are represented, correct?
Yeah. So the easiest way to get them is to go to the aka.ms/oneguidance, and then from there and business process, and that'll take you to the landing page. Once you do that, if you're familiar with kind of the docs tree structure, on the left, the tree nodes are going to be each of the end-to-end business processes. So order to cash, procure to pay, plan to produce. And then you'll be able to expand, for example, order to cash, and there'll be a list of articles and other nodes underneath that. So it's going to be very similar to our regular product documentation with the kind of tree node structure to find the deeper levels. And as you just pointed out, Drew, we did an initial launch. This is by no means complete. But we did an initial launch, so there are some, all 14 end-to-end processes have a top-level page and have at least one business process area documented. But beyond that, we're still working on getting that information out. So you're not going to see a full-fledged document repository yet, but you'll at least see the structure of what we're looking at. And we can definitely share the slides and the link after the presentation so that people can find these things easily. So stay tuned for that. Now I think we'll go in and just talk about an example of a pattern. Oh, just let me click 7 times. There we go.
There we go.
So a pattern example, a scenario for a pattern might be if you have multiple forecasts within your organization. So the context of the pattern is sometimes you'll have multiple sources of a forecast, such as a statistically generated forecast or even multiple statistically generated forecasts. You might have a customer provided forecast, a sales team forecast, and all sorts of different forecasts that you need to track in the system. The solution to that in this pattern would be to create a different forecast model, which is a field inside of Dynamics 365 supply chain management for each type of forecast. Some of the considerations or issues you might consider are if you have integrations to third-party forecasting systems, what you would see typically is a model for each integration so that they're kept separately. Unless, Drew, you've got something we need to update the pattern with, because I know you've done this a lot.
You had to selfishly choose this example for both of us.
Yes.
I think it's really relevant for a lot of people because you can see the different pieces that are, or the different activities that are going to happen in implementation and fall into one of these patterns. So forecasting in general, common scenario, the forecast model is almost a design decision that people have to come to, because as you mentioned here, the issues and considerations, or even the problem, you could have statistically generated forecasts that could be AX 2012 or D365 out of the box with the demand forecasting analysis tool set.
Right.
Could be a third-party system, whether that's something like a simple Excel type system, ForecastX. It could be Farsight. It could be Agility or SAP or Oracle coming in to Dynamics. Multiple forecasts for the same item. You could have collaborative forecast. There's a lot of ins and outs, and you need to figure out, where do our processes fall in line? Where do the technologies integrate with each other? What are those resources that are available? You've done tech talks on demand forecasting. We've both presented, I think, at conferences on that exact topic. There's the whole diving into statistical analysis outside of dynamic specific, just understanding rates, the science of machine learning and tool sets like that. So I think this is a great example of one of the patterns that that will be offered, because it brings a lot of those real scenarios into play.
Yeah, totally. And to your point, that's the whole, we have the issues and considerations to help people think about all the different considerations when deciding what their forecast model should be, all the things you need to keep in mind to make an appropriate design decision. We walk you through how to do the configuration itself. And then, like you said, we have all of these resources that we've built, whether it's the tech talk that I did or docs articles we have. But here's all the additional resources if you need to know more about the product, as well as tagging the product that it applies to, the industry. So all those things to make finding the right pattern easier. So I think it's a completely new way to frame requirement solutioning. And all of this information is information partners like you have in your brains, but we don't necessarily have that somewhere on the Microsoft Docs site. And that's why this is so different, because now we're making it easy to find and accessible to everyone. I'm still going to need to call you so you can tell me when I'm wrong, but at least we're getting past the basics.
And it addresses some of those challenges. You need to understand the full tool set you have available to approach the challenges you have as a business, but understand which ones really apply to what you're doing. If I'm an electrical OEM, I'm going to have some specific requirements that might not be addressed in the ERP, but understanding how that falls in line with other processes I have, like manufacturing part number tracking is important. So your partners will bring that, and hopefully through the tags of understanding this is for, chemical and food manufacturers and process manufacturing, this type of stuff is more relevant. For our life sciences industries, this is more relevant. That type of insight from both Microsoft and the community, I think, will benefit everybody.
Absolutely. And I do want to point out towards the tag. So I kept it very generic and said manufacturing distribution, but what we're actually doing with tags is using the SIC codes. So the industry standard industry tags, which also relate to the NIACS codes or whatever they are. But we're aligning our assignment of industries to the standard way of tagging industries in the hope of making it a lot easier to find things, because you can call something retail, but what about wholesale trade? Is that also retail and distribution? And sometimes retail and distribution, or sometimes retail is manufacturing. So we're aligning with kind of the standard way to classify industries in the hope that sorting through these patterns will be much simpler. And the last thing I want to talk about is where do we go from here? We will be gathering feedback. You can see we did launch, like I said, we launched the Guidance Hub in March of this past year. The 14th end-to-end process is going live next month, and really it was great because it was feedback that we heard from the initial launch. So the initial launch was very much what you think of when you think of business processes, So processing orders, moving inventory, making things. And somebody pointed out very rightly that system administration, or IT, is actually an entire business process. So we're rolling that out as our 14th business process starting in July. And we are opening up our crowdsourcing framework. So this is where we're looking to our community members, whether you're a user, partner, or other, to help provide the content that's going to make this hub so much more effective. Our next big target in terms of content is that by the end of August, all of the business process areas, so that's the second level deep, will be complete and published. So we're on track for that target, and I think that will kind of round out the high level ability to filter through the different processes and process areas. Longer term on the roadmap, we are looking to incorporate the catalog within an Azure DevOps template. I know that everybody has their own methodology of how they implement, but pretty much everyone's using Azure DevOps. And if we're going to take all of this stuff we've done on the mapping and linking and put it into an Azure DevOps template that can then be downloaded and modified as you need it to support business process implementations from the partner and user side. And ultimately, our goal is a year from now, by July of 2024, to be 75% complete with documenting all top 3 levels. I think patterns is going to be a never-ending goal because you can always have another pattern. But you saw, even in terms of business processes, that's 1,800 documents that we have to make. So we're targeting to be 75% complete in a year. So that is the roadmap for this. And yeah, asterisk at the bottom, dates and deliverable subject to change.
It's ambitious, but it's good to have goals. You need to track progress. So I think there's a couple things that stand out to me. I like the system admin IT call out. There's probably people on this call in our audience in that role that struggle with some of the maybe maintenance type tasks, whether it's security or batch jobs or connecting, APIs, whatever it may be that they're responsible for. There's not always the best guidance for that. Sometimes it falls into like a semi-technical role depending on the size of your organization. So I think that's great to hear that's going to be added. But really cool to see the milestones, and appreciate the insight into those.
I can't wait until we can plug our brains in and download the pattern content directly from our subconscious. But in the meantime, I'm looking forward to your contributions to the crowdsourcing, Andrew.
Oh man, don't hold me to it.
All right, I'll toss it back to you to talk about how we see this in action in implementations.
Great, thanks, Anne. So as we've both really talked about a lot of the advantage and benefits of this, even prior to Microsoft providing this framework and utilizing this tool, if you are or not, I think it's important to understand what it's like to be on a process-based implementation and what that really means. A lot of you have maybe seen similar flows to this as maybe a methodology or an implementation stage slide. And you really, what I want to focus on is what activities are happening when we're doing business process oriented approach. We're not starting necessarily with here's how it's done in D365 finance and supply chain and doing that how-to walkthrough guide. Sometimes, yes, you can start with some sort of concept training, but the goal is understanding requirements of the business. Maybe that's starting with some sort of assessment project or requirements gathering analysis stage, understanding what are the business objectives, what do the users actually need to do to achieve their goals, and focusing on that business analysis rather than just a functional consultant kind of point click methodology, and being able to process map and actually visually show or diagram what you're doing as a business today and where you want to go next. Have that current state versus future state mindset. So we start that in the initiate stage during business process methodology before we get into implementation, where you start your solution design. That can be configuration, that could be enhancements, that could be integrations, that could be third-party systems, whatever options you choose, it's going to end up potentially in some development or security role assignment. I think a lot of partners out there like to have a mindset of this is where we can differentiate ourselves. Yeah, there are tools like Anne is showing with Microsoft to give guidance and best practice. I know for us as a partner, we don't want to look at ourselves just as maybe a system implementer or integrator D365 specialist. That's why at Argano, yes, we have towers that are product focused, but ideally we are focused on the client outcomes, which is why we start with the requirements and the process in mind. And then we get to the tool set as we go along. So that implementation stage, you start to bring in those tools. What are the platforms you're using to address these challenges that you gather during the initiate stage? And as you start to design the systems and roll those out, you get into a preparation stage. You start your process testing, your user acceptance testing. You might have various activities within that, whether your organization calls them CRPs or project increments, program increments, but kind of complementing both the process with the system, whatever enhancements they might need, third-party systems they might need. That kind of brings you to that special sauce, right? As a company, as an organization, you don't want to just say, oh, ways we're going to use 100% standard. That's ideal for maybe efficiency, money saving, etc. But there's always going to be a time where you get to one challenge where there's not a perfect fit from your ERP or your BI tool, whatever it might be, that's going to differentiate you, and you need that efficiency in that challenge versus any other. And that's where you and your partner coming to that solution during the business process approach will really help you get over the hump and address those challenges, so that when you get into the final stage, operate, you can just focus on continuous process improvement and optimization. And no matter what maybe you're coming from historically, whether it's lean manufacturing and using visual mapping there, or companies that use Visio to document all their current business processes or some other tool, the same end goal is still in mind, which is optimizing and adding value to our business processes and eliminating all the stuff that slows us down or doesn't add value to our end customers.
Yeah, I definitely want to underline the point you're making there. I think a mistake that is sometimes made in implementations is assuming that the way or ways that it is possible to do it in the system are the ways that we must be doing something. I can think of a scenario where I worked with a customer who they had developed some processes in their warehouse that actually made them more efficient. And out of the box, there was no way for them to do that in Dynamics. And they were right. I mean, warehouses are a really tough place because they're mostly a cost center and not a profit center unless you're billing for warehouse transactions. And if they abandoned these kind of custom processes they were doing in their legacy system to adopt standard Dynamics, and they were giving up all the cost savings that came with that. So I definitely think that taking the approach of understanding the process and why we're doing the process before we just say, well, it's not standard product is a really good way to make sure that you're doing the best of both worlds, kind of business process oriented and, best practices for product implementation.
Absolutely. I think the one other thing to point out that maybe isn't fully shown in this slide, but we mentioned earlier, is that transition of ownership. If you go through these stages as part of a project and somebody who supports your business, you are going to understand the solution better. You're going to adopt it better. You're going to be able to transfer that knowledge better to your employees and coworkers, which will give that kind of full sign off of, yes, this can do what our business needs to do. And when we get into testing, things will go a lot smoother. Definitely that investment in that process is hugely beneficial on both sides.
Yeah, I can also recall a project where we got to go live and then we found out there was a complete additional order channel that hadn't been solutioned for. So it's those things will always happen on projects, right? Implementation mistakes happen, but keeping the process oriented in mind really helps make sure that you're considering all of the scenarios that a business may operate under in their different processes, as well as the value of why they're doing it the way they're doing it.
So business process mapping is a big part of this. When you're having business processes in mind, you need a way to show that and understand that. That's tough to do. A lot of times when it comes to doing assessments or requirements gathering, you end up with a bunch of different documents. Maybe it's an Excel list full of requirements. Maybe it's a Word document that's 600 pages long. But what does that do for your business? Probably not a lot. So the business process mapping piece is a big part of this for us to help transition and get the right solution. And it starts with current state mapping. So one, all the stakeholders, whether that be your C-levels, whether it be your managers, the individuals performing the actions, they all understand the requirements and there's no ambiguity to them. They can be translated one way. Everyone saw them. They agree to what they mean, and have that same sense of what they're trying to accomplish. And that's the what and how do they accomplish it. They can set benchmarks, process KPIs. What are the most important pieces for us to implement this? What are the things we're trying to achieve? Is it reduce inventory? Is it actually something financially that we need to do? Is it get off of a legacy system because we have a due date based on our old parent company that we're held against? You need to have those correct benchmarks for your implementation and your business processes in place. You'll easily be able to identify crossovers between your products and departments that you might not have otherwise identified and made clear to everyone before. Very often processes or activities are in people's heads is what we hear over and over again in implementations. So having them be able to document that really highlights how much interdependency there is in organizations and then helps them tie that into requirements gathering.
I think it also helps them understand how unnecessarily complex the current state might sometimes be. Yeah, I think it's a really important exercise, and I think that it's even something that if you're an end user and your company is thinking about going through some sort of transformation, that's something that you can do without waiting, right? It's really and it's a valuable way to establish the teams, establish the authority on your side of including all of your business stakeholders in the process and letting them make sure that whatever is important to them is getting included in the current state mapping. So you don't even have to have, a partner signed up to be out there doing a current state map. And if anything, it'll help the partner come on board to give you faster support for the process.
And then what we want our end result to be, or part of that result during the business process mapping, is communicating our future state. What do we want that future state to be? And communicating that solution to the stakeholders the right way. If I'm the CEO, I'm very unlikely going to be in requirements gathering workshops or asking people what, if they do three-way matching. But I need to understand at the end of the day what we're putting in place, how it impacts everyone, and that I'm okay, that it matches my goals as a key stakeholder in the business. And then as that flows down to other roles as well, being able to establish or estimate the return of investment and the business value, I think something that gets lost in implementations is single business process or requirement efficiency versus overall efficiency, right? I might have to do something one way today. That might be faster than I do it in the future. But when I take everything in the context of that business process, I could be a lot quicker or more efficient or reduce cost. So getting out of the mindset of single actions and looking at more business processes and total investment and time it takes to do business is really key there.
Yeah.
Establishing documentation and benchmarks for it.
Yeah, I think there's nothing quite looking at a current state map and a future state map next to each other and going, wow, either we did a really good job or, this doesn't look like the right direction we're going in and we need to redo it. I think so many people are visual people. So from that is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Visualizing those efficiency gains, as I mentioned, with your benchmarks, your total cost of ownership, and then tying that into process testing. So getting out of single requirement testing, but process testing, unit testing, end-to-end testing to actually sign off on those business processes working versus just I did my part. It's all good is what we're trying to get to.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so important to make sure that you are, take sales orders, for example, that you're following the entire order to cash process all the way through versus just saying, yeah, I made 30 orders today, so I know that it works, right? Well, could we confirm those orders? Could we ship them? Could we invoice them? And if we couldn't do it all the way through, go live is going to be a lot worse than it has to be. So definitely can't stress the importance of process testing enough.
Yeah, and setting good benchmarks, as you pointed out, not arbitrary ones of just how many orders did I enter.
Right. Yes, definitely.
Let's see. You have to advance the next slide, and mine's there. We go.
I gotcha.
Right. Seems stuck for a second. So getting back to the benefits to kind of close us out and recap before getting to questions from the audience. Ensuring there's a completeness of business process design is really that main takeaway that we keep hitting home on. Not looking at siloed individual requirements, not forgetting about different parts of the business, not thinking of security as an afterthought or compliance as an afterthought or whatever those unique things or maybe non-unique things are about our business that must be done. And with that, it helps us put in test cases that are based on real scenarios, not just a list of textbook scenarios from, this is not a shot at APQC, but just taking, a standard traditional list of scenarios. What are the scenarios for our business that might not be listed, that must be met? Process-oriented testing will always help us with that. It supports coverage of all scenarios for a process, whether that's in a specific part of the system or not. As Ann mentioned, 1,800 plus processes they're looking at for the guidance hub alone. That's not maybe holistic, but they're addressing as much as they can, always considering who could be impacted, what could be impacted when you're building out your test cases and your implementations. Getting specific to security, it will reduce the risk of incorrect security rule assignment. That is often one of the most difficult challenges of an implementation. There's partners that do nothing but specialize in security. We as a partner provide IP for security because of the maybe complexity it often inputs or imparts onto projects, maybe unnecessarily. But in a process-oriented test, you call out what are the roles of these processes, who needs to do what, when do they need to do it, why do they need to do that, and that will help you identify security role assignment and reduce the risk there, which is especially important for those in compliance. I know there's a DIA event in New England this week in life sciences. There's plenty of compliance that they have to address, and security role assignment would be a huge part of any system implementation for a company like that. So it's a huge benefit and relief when you have that as part of these projects. And then finally, allowing the business to feel comfortable signing off on a design. You'll often hear from subject matter experts or business process owners, I didn't know what I was signing off, or, I was just told to click this button, or I was just doing as I do today, whatever the excuse or anecdote might be. So showing them that what they're doing is actually in line with their process and what they need to do as an organization really helps alleviate that concern and give them that sense of comfort and ownership and responsibility.
Right. When you're doing just requirements oriented testing, that's so granular to say, oh, well, if a customer has exceeded their credit limit, the order needs to go on hold. Yeah, I saw that it worked one time, right? That requirement is met versus kind of piecing together everything about monitoring customer credit and collections, communicating that hold to a manager, getting it released, getting credit limits updated, all the pieces that have to go together. You miss that if you don't do process-oriented testing, if you're not rolling all the way up. Definitely. So.
Yeah, and thinking about, like, for example, maybe new releases. You want to keep up to date with Microsoft. You want to automate signing off of your processes. Well, if there's scenarios that you didn't address, how are you going to use something like RSAT or another tool, whatever it may be, to automate something where you only covered 50%, 60% of your processes or scenarios? So to use or take advantage of tools and efficiencies and things like generative AI, those rules of your organization need to be better defined and understood.
Yeah, definitely.
I think we have about 5 minutes left. It looks like we got a couple of questions in the queue, and I'll start with them. So one of the questions we heard was how can we ensure that a business process that the SME wants actually benefits the overall business, i.e. I'm used to doing it this way, which is something I'm sure you and I have heard on pretty much every project we've ever been on.
Yeah.
It's a good question. Can you ensure it 100%? No, but I think focusing on once again, what we said, not the individual piece, but the overall piece, is your day-to-day becoming easier? Is the weekly hours of process X getting reduced, or maybe challenges meeting it getting reduced, is a good place to start. Showing them, proving it to them still has to be done. You can't just explain it. You have to show that you're going to improve their day-to-day is a big part of it, which might take time. I don't know what your thoughts are, Ann.
I think I have two main thoughts. The first is that expectation setting is one of the most important things in an ERP or any other product implementation. So if you have, if you have a project sponsor who's saying, yeah, this system is great, it's going to do everything that you have today and more, right? Sometimes that expectation alone can be really damaging, and having kind of a top down of this product is going to enable our business to operate better or to run in a way that we need it to, right? It's kind of making sure people have the right mindset coming in. But when you inevitably, regardless of expectation setting, you'll run into people who say, well, I like the way I do it, I want it to keep going. To me, that's always an indication that you need to ask more questions. What do you like so much about it? Why is this important to you? Because I think that when you let somebody kind of be the master of their own destiny, it's a lot less scary to them to make a change. But if you're hearing them when they say, this is why I like it the way it is, then you can take the why and potentially come out with another solution, but help them get on board with it because you now understand what's important to them when they do the process. Does that make sense?
I think so. I think it makes a lot of sense. We have maybe a similar question, or worded differently. How do we validate my process as a customer actually supported in standard, even if it's listed in the process catalog? Should we work as D365 and ditch our current standard?
Oof.
It's a tough one. I think we hit on it a little bit when we got to the point about we don't want to take away things that are gaining efficiencies. If there's something that works and you and your partner review it, or you run it through fast track and make sure that there's no super red flags about supporting it, and there's not a better process or design out there, I don't think we ever want to say ditch it. Those things that are going to give your company a competitive advantage and make your lives easier or reduce costs, we're still going to do those. We always like to go into implementations and say we want to remain vanilla and 100% out of the box, but 100% out of the box is extremely rare. I don't know if either of us could have ever been on that case.
Oh no, I've heard of one, actually. I did hear of one time. I can't remember the full scope of everything they were using, but I thought it was amazing. And I'll say, like, firstly, when it comes to the documentation repository that we're going to build, I think that the patterns that we'll focus on are the most impactful ones, right? Hey, when you set up your cost model like this and you're in this kind of an environment, there's a giant performance implication. Like, we want to document that in a pattern because it impacts a high group of our users, right? But even if you think about something as simple as like a sales order entry process, there are infinite ways that you could do that. And for your business, you may have different requirements based on the way you communicate with your customers or the way that you set prices. And we're going to try to at least document the, the end-to-end process, the process area, and the specific business processes, but we're never going to be able to document a pattern for every possible way you could use the system unless AI really gets good real soon. So I don't think that you should, I don't think it can ever be a hard line of if it's not in the Microsoft documentation, we don't configure it that way. I think it's that we've expected people to know all of this stuff inside their own head or inside a secret document repository. And we're just working towards kind of democratizing best practice availability. Instead of tribal knowledge, we're making it make sense.
It does, and I think it's a great step in the right direction, and I know we appreciate it as a partner. I'm sure all partners and customers do. We're at time, so I do want to thank everyone. We will share the slides, and was gracious enough to include the link to the Business Process Guidance Hub in those slides, so we'll get those out to everyone registered, and this was recorded, so you will have access to the recording as well. We appreciate everyone for your time today and hope this information was helpful. Thank you, Anne, very much for being here with us today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, just last plug, my email is literally Ann Krupke, no dots, no spaces, at Microsoft.com. So if you do have a question we didn't have time to answer or you want to help contribute, please do feel free to reach out.
And you can also join her Top of the Mind YouTube series and ask her questions there.
That's true. Thank you so much for having me today.
Thanks, Anne. Have a good day, everyone.